Welcome, junior scientists. Let's dive right into today's explainer and begin a truly exciting journey. Today, we're going to discover exactly what makes living things so incredibly special. You know, we look around our world every single day, but how often do we really stop to ask what it actually means to be alive? So go ahead and button up those invisible lab coats because we're going to observe, test, and imagine our way through the amazing natural world.
Here's our lesson plan for the day. First, we'll figure out what's living or non-living. Then we'll be testing how seeds sprout, discovering that plants can move too, and imagining your life as a plant. After that, we'll compare mosquitoes versus frogs, and finally, we'll wrap up with how you can become a real scientist.
All right, Section 1, living or non-living.
To kick things off, we're going to design a group project right off the bat to classify items we might find out there on our playground. Now, I want you to think about the differences between you and, say, a car parked in the lot. You can both move, right? In fact, a car can go incredibly fast, but does that actually make it alive? Well, while a car moves, it definitely cannot grow, it doesn't breathe, and it doesn't reproduce. I mean, it doesn't need to eat a sandwich to get bigger, and it certainly doesn't have baby cars. So movement alone just isn't enough to make something living.
Now take a look at this table. We can systematically track and classify the things around us using a chart like this. We can safely put pigeons and plants in the living column. Why? Because they share absolutely essential characteristics. They grow, they need nutrition, and they reproduce. But a pencil, or that moving car, they go straight into the non-living column. That's because they don't respire, which is a fancy science word for breathe, and they don't excrete waste. As real scientists, we use this specific checklist of traits to figure out if something is truly alive.
Moving right along to Section 2, testing how seeds sprout.
Okay, so we often think plants need sunlight to survive, and hey, that's totally true for fully grown plants. But what about a dormant little seed buried deep under the dirt? Let's design a simple experiment together to figure out exactly what conditions trigger a tiny seed to wake up and germinate.
Here is our experimental setup. Imagine these pots sitting on our classroom windowsill and tucked away in the closet. We've got 4 pots. Pot A is soaking up direct sunlight but gets absolutely zero water. Pot B gets sunlight too, but we flooded it with way too much water. Pot C is hidden away in total darkness in the closet, but it gets perfectly moist soil. And finally, Pot D gets both direct sunlight and moist soil. The crucial thing here is that we are actively testing different variables, sunlight, darkness, and water levels, over a 15-day period to see which beans actually decide to sprout.
And look at this. Here is our class log tracking our daily observations, and the results are actually pretty surprising. We totally expected Pot D to sprout, of course, but check out Pot C. The beans sitting in total darkness actually sprouted. This proves that light isn't strictly necessary for beans to germinate initially. But wait, Pot A with no water did absolutely nothing. And Pot B, the one we flooded, it literally drowned because the seed couldn't get any air from the spaces in the soil. So air and water are most definitely the non-negotiable ingredients for a seed to wake up.
All right, let's jump into Section 3. Plants can move too. Now, to understand how a plant moves, we first need to understand the word stimulus. A stimulus is basically anything or any event that prompts a living being to respond. Think about it. If you accidentally touch a hot cup of tea, you instantly yank your hand away, right? That heat is the stimulus. Well, guess what? Plants respond to stimuli too. The famous touch-me-not plant actually folds its leaves inward when you gently touch it. Or think about the amla tree, which slowly folds its leaves up to go to sleep after the sun goes down and the light fades.
And it gets even wilder. This brilliantly illustrates how some plants take movement to an extreme level. Meet the insectivorous Drosera plant. It has these saucer-shaped leaves covered in tiny hairs with sticky ends. When a careless little insect lands on it, the plant feels the stimulus, and those sticky hairs actively curl inward, wrapping around the bug to trap it. The plant literally catches its own food to get nutrition. How cool is that?
We know all these amazing facts today thanks to brilliant minds like the famous Indian scientist Jagadish Chandra Bose. Now, he didn't just casually observe plants, he actually invented this amazing machine called a crystallographer. This highly sensitive tool let him measure exactly how fast plants grow and precisely how they respond to stimuli, like light, heat, and gravity. He demonstrated to the whole world that plants are highly sensitive, active, and responsive living creatures.
Which brings us to Section 4, Your Life as a Plant.
For this next part, I want you to use your imagination. I want you to shrink down, close your eyes, and imagine that you are a plant.
growing right here in our classroom pot, okay? You begin your life as a tiny, sleeping embryo wrapped in a tough, hard seed coat buried deep in the dark dirt. Suddenly you feel water. The water wakes you up and softens that tough outer shell. Pop! You burst out. You start pushing a tiny shoot upward, fighting your way through the dirt to find that warm sunlight. At the exact same time, you're stretching your roots deep down into the soil to anchor yourself and drink up nutrients. You grow taller, you sprout leaves, and eventually you create pods of your own to start the next generation.
This visual timeline right here represents that beautiful, complex journey you just took. You transitioned from stage 1, a simple seed, into germination, and then you develop those bright green leaves. By stage 4, you bloom into beautiful flowers, and finally, in stage 5, those flowers transform into fruits or pods carrying brand new seeds. This sequence is the ultimate cycle of life, demonstrating growth, nutrition, and reproduction all in one incredible timeline.
Let's hop over to Section 5, Mosquitoes versus Frogs.
Notice the striking visual contrast on this slide. Both mosquitoes and frogs undergo radical changes, but they do it in completely different ways. Mosquitoes start out as eggs, turn into these worm-like wriggling larvae, then transform into pupae, before finally emerging as flying, buzzing adult insects. Frogs, on the other hand, start out as a jelly-like cluster of eggs we call spawn. They hatch into swimming tadpoles with long tails and 0 legs. Over a few weeks, they grow into froglets, sprout strong jumping legs, and lose their tails entirely to become adult frogs. Now, even though an adult flying mosquito and an adult jumping frog look totally different, they share a very crucial survival need: stagnant water. Both of their early life stages live entirely underwater, but here's the catch: they still need to breathe air. This is exactly why health officials advise us to put a very thin layer of kerosene oil on stagnant puddles around our homes. That oil forms a blanket on the water's surface, stopping mosquito larvae from reaching the air to breathe. It safely breaks their life cycle and stops them from multiplying in our neighborhoods. And finally, Section 6, become a real scientist.
All right, it is time to take everything we've learned and put it into action. Scientific observation and recording data are incredibly important, so here is your class project. First, I want you to start keeping a daily nature journal. Pick a plant near your house and draw its growth stages every single day, just like our class log. Second, we are going to plan a field trip to a local garden so we can observe plant growth stages in a massive environment. And third, you're going to prepare to interview a gardener. You'll ask them all about the specific needs of their plants and the timelines for their growth. You are going to collect real-world data exactly like Jagadish Chandra Bose did.
So, I want you to grab your notebook, sharpen that pencil, and keep your eyes wide open. The living world isn't just something trapped in a textbook, it's happening right outside your window, constantly full of amazing transformations. I'll leave you with this to think about. What tiny, incredible living detail will you observe first in your very own backyard today? Get out there and start exploring.